Hey folks, Steve here with a post-mortem video for our Great Crusade campaign playthrough of Axis Empire's Ultimate Edition, the Totalikrieg half of it. Oof, mouthful. Um, First of all, I want to once again thank the folks who have um, been watching my engagement with Axis Empires since we began. It's I think this would be a very different set of videos if I didn't have those folks. I'm talking about Mark Ruggiero. I'm talking about Max. I'm talking about a few other folks, Mr. Hanna, who's out there somewhere. Had you guys not been providing commentary and help, we might be in a very different state of playing through the game and the campaign turns and all that kind of stuff. It's been very, very helpful, and I hope is also helpful to whomever's been watching these videos and is also trying to learn the game to learn by watching and also seeing those same comments that have helped to shape the gameplay and everything like that. Um, as I'm beginning cleanup, and I'm like, okay, wait, don't clean up until we've done the postmortem. Um, so here's what I think has gone on here. Like and remember, this is not a review. This is just a hey, let's assess how that campaign went. This protracted campaign, which ended early, right? And we really got to the beginning of Winter 44, and the Allies basically have control of all of Germany. Technically, Hungary is not in play in this scenario, and neither was Yugoslavia. And I had units kind of sneak around there. I don't care. That'll be my house rule. Like that's fine. Do that if you want. I'm not worried about it. So I didn't actually need somebody in Budapest because it's not in play. But whatever, I did anyway because we could. Um, Understanding that we won early, you're right. We were basically like 5 turns early before the winter really kicked in. You try to dissect how that happened. Why did that happen? Where were mistakes made? Did I do something wrong? As the Germans most certainly. Um, I think this is just one of those things. Like, hey, we're starting with the entry of the Allies like into Europe proper. It's gonna be the Axis on the back foot. We got to expect that. We got to know that, and just understand that. That's where we're heading, right? Like that's the situation that we're gonna run into. Um, so if I go back to even the first turn, I think there was a potential that maybe we did something wrong with the markers early on. It's hard to go back and remember everything there because some of that was done off camera. We're like, okay, let's say maybe the Axis could have um, delayed the invasion of Sicily. Would that have changed a whole lot? Well, maybe it could have delayed the inevitable. But I don't think it would have maybe, like, I guess in the grand scheme of things, like, would that have really changed a whole lot? I don't know. If they were starting 1 turn later than they did. But if we were to do this all over again, right, let's go through those support markers. Let's really try to figure out, can you get an invasion off, and to what degree can you get one off is, I think, important. The significant thing, and just to call out again, it's like, coming into Sicily, you can land in a non-port hex. You're tracing supply basically to the beachhead, or you're operating such that you need to take a port. So like coming into Gala, projecting a Zoc here, being able to attack Palermo and forcing them to retreat into destruction is kind of a nice, clean way to get in there, right, without just trying to attack Palermo. But again, depending on how the Axis sets up, might be a different story. Even so much to say, like, well, why don't you just land at Salerno, right? If Sicily is too strong, like, there's really nothing stopping you from trying to get into Salerno. The difference is you're having to do that with core formations, and you need sea lift to get more guys over. Where here, you're using the beachhead as a bridge. So, I would love to see variations of the setup for the Axis in this Great Crusade scenario. to see like what are folks doing different, that either helps defend Italy from the Allied attack, or what. But it kind of felt like, well, pick where we're going to go, but we're going to get progress made somewhere. Whether that be actually bothering to get into Sicily or going somewhere else, even somewhere closer to Rome. And the important thing just being like, if we can get into a city like Naples or Rome or wherever, um, or importantly up even north, that helps to knock Italy down a peg, and then we finish it off when we can. And so the kind of breaking into the like, here's the next major failure. The Axis. I had a point here where we had the Germans, not the Italians, but the Germans were here, right in this band to protect northern Italy, and I said, you know what? Maybe there's some better positions down here. We might be able to defend further down. And I started to make my move, and then I realized, well, hey, why not drop into Genoa? Um, I think I've got the force that we could do it. We could, we've got the support markers right now. Let's send some corps over and just see if we can make a crack. And sure enough, that was pretty devastating. All things considered, I mean, it really allowed us to contest up here where the terrain's just a little bit different in the valley. And the rest of the allies could make their march up, and we were able to do that. We did have some fighting here, but like it didn't benefit the Germans too much from having to fight in and around that area. And being able to just conquer Italy outright meant that we had the steps necessary. Now we didn't have to necessarily garrison everything in Italy, except to maintain, you know, uh, air basing or naval basing for particular reasons. We could march up, we could keep pounding in, and get more frontage on our attacks on the Germans, where here it'd be tighter. Um, and then that meant that we could siphon off forces to go into Marseille, and that ended up being really important. I mean, it kind of negated the need to do as much D-Day stuff, because it was like, well, worst comes to worst, we just ship into the South, and we could do that. We could reasonably do that. Um, because there, when I look at all the cards across what we've played, there's really not that many steps that the Germans get. Period. It's like the Italians don't get very many steps, but the Germans don't get very many steps for the most part. And um, maybe in a true campaign game, the Germans can be, if they're doing much better in Russia, maybe they're putting more steps over here. But it never felt like the Germans really had a lot to defend with. And it gets to our, so first major mistake is the Axis leaving. Not, this, some of this was an experiment, right? Like, well, let's try to go down, and then, okay, well, let's attack Genoa as the Allies. Let's just see how vulnerable Genoa is. Well, it was fairly vulnerable, at least the way that I was defending it. Now, I could have done a lot more to increase the strength there, and I just didn't do that. So that was, okay, that's the experiment, right? Watch for a northern Italy landing, because it is possible to try it, if you've got the support markers for it. And at that point, you're just making Italy a two-pincered, campaign that the Axis can't sustain ultimately, because they can't lose the mountain pass over here, and they don't necessarily have a lot of forces to spin down through Marseille either, for that matter, to try to contain it. Because at the same time, there's really not that much stopping you from still building up in Britain and still making a crossing like we did into Calais, and fighting through there. So this gets us to our next sort of major failure on my part, is I turned too many of our steps along the coastline here into fortresses. Now, I'd be interested to hear what people think about that, because it's like, well, let's try to defend these spots the best that we think we can. Um, and that means turning them into fortresses, getting additional strength and steps that will make it hard to break into the coast. Like, let's do that. But by doing that, it meant that as soon as we had a way to bypass those guys, right, all these forts were doing is telling the Allied player where to go where these things are not, which was to start with here, and then we eventually could just smash our way into these forts. A brittle, we tried a hard outer shell, but ultimately a brittle defense, because it meant that as soon as these ports didn't matter, um, the Allies uh, basically could leave, several German steps. Remember that these are two-step fortresses, but they were placed by replacing one-step Germans. Well, you have one, two, three, four, several, almost half a dozen German steps that could have been formed up into multi-step army units along here had I been able to pull, really try to pull them back. So I maybe should have only turned maybe half of those guys into true forts and just figure things out from there. And then I would have been able to do kind of this more minor point, pulling back early. Like at some point, you just got to say, okay, have Paris or something and pull back, because trying to fight for Paris isn't going to do you any good. The Germans just didn't really have a good opportunity, I felt, to do that because of the immobile fortresses. And even if I had, I probably should have been preparing to pull back earlier than I was. But this fight in North Italy became a pretty major concern. So all of that, I think, certainly the Germans, didn't couldn't quite get what they needed, and the Allies enjoyed a pretty solid approach to um, the combats and everything else. Just the ability to project their force the way that they needed to, they could do that. This kind of brings me to the support marker stuff, where honestly, even at the best of times, the U.S. commitment level basically nullified the VP scale for delay DRMs for the Axis. So, this is just one of those things. As soon as the U.S. enters the game, right, there's the Axis on the back foot. But here, especially, like we could have +2 victory points, which means a -2 um, delay modifier for the Germans, but the U.S. commitment level basically nullifies that. And very generally, the Germans are going to end up with additional situations that are going to add to their delay DRM. So as soon as we had the big support marker competition, as soon as the Germans were running low on markers, they were almost continuously low on markers, and the Allies almost always had the advantage, where they could just bluff out the Germans and say, "Hey, I'm going to keep trying to place this marker. You can keep trying to contest it until you're empty, and I'm still going to get to place my marker." Um, and it never felt like, okay, well, if the Germans are going to if they try to use their markers on their turn, well, then the Allies are just going to block that, right? So the Axis markers were almost purely having to be defensive. But even on the defensive, they were almost always going to be um, negated. And a big part of that cannot be escaped is that the U.S. commitment level essentially meant that, like, you could expect 50% of the time or more a allied marker used will be back next turn, and you could almost guarantee that it would be several turns before the same opposing German marker would come back. So just as soon as we crossed that threshold, the Allies basically had full support mastery kind of wherever they wanted to go, and it was almost like, I don't even care that my Germans are getting some of their markers back, because there's almost no point to them. Like they're just not going to be enough to make any sort of difference. The best we could do is try to is slow down the Allies so that they weren't getting like 3 air markers all around this area. Like they only got 2 or they only got 1. Um, which that kind of takes the oomph out of things. Like the best I can do is make it so you don't have maximum power. That's it. That's all the Axis can do. Um, and here, having done so many of these support marker, competition things, what I do find is that it's certainly not very. It's not as fun, I guess, as if we were. And I'll discover this with Schiff's Krieg at some point. Like when you have like air fighting air, ships fighting ships, like the game just doesn't represent it at all. Like I realize it's the delay boxes where the fight happens. It's like it's not happening. It's totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's just you're done, and then depending on what the delay marker situation is, you're kind of screwed for a while or you're not. There's no way for like a surprise victory, because the modifiers just don't really allow for it, honestly. So I think that's kind of like that's definitely um, maybe a weakness, is just the like, hey, you're really not getting any kind of air fight. You're really not getting any kind of naval battle. The game's not trying to do that, I understand, but it is a lot less fulfilling. Now, Shift's Creek would probably shift that a bit, and we'd get some of those things back in that context. And technically, we could have played the scenario with Shift's Creek, but I don't know. I'm not going to go to the effort to replay this with Shift's Creek right now. But it's just something I thought about. Like, yeah, these markers, it's important. And each turn, I'm looking to see when and how I'm going to use them. But it was just more of a weight of DRMs than anything. It was like, maybe in a couple of places the Allies got some rough die rolls, and then in some cases the Germans kind of got a little luckier and could get some stuff back pretty quickly. But again, the numbers game just, it just felt very +1, -1. You have a place a marker, remove a marker, place a marker, remove a marker. And I tend not to like that so much in games, just because it's like, okay, well then, what are we really doing here? We're taking up time doing something that maybe doesn't make a whole lot of sense to, or what. It's like we're in a weird abstraction level where um, these markers are just placed and then they go into the ether. In an opposed game, I guess there's a little bit more edge to it, but that's my repeated challenge with solitaire. Is just it just doesn't hit quite the same as other games where there's maybe more die rolls involved. You actually are like, who's winning this fight? You feel good when you shoot down the enemy plane or whatever, or you win the naval engagement. Here it's like you don't really get an understanding of what happened, and you kind of have to self-describe to yourself, like, well, what does it mean not to see our ship come back for 6 turns? Well, I guess that fleet was defeated, and maybe we're building more ships and we'll deploy them later. That's kind of it, as opposed to, no, yeah, we won. Like, we clearly won that fight. Hooray, hooray! And now what? That you don't quite get that feeling. Um, so yeah, I think the Allies did very well here. I think the Germans, I made some pretty critical mistakes. Had I not made those mistakes, well, the Germans are going to be on the back foot anyway. Maybe we would have gotten to 45 before something broke through. But certainly from an attritional standpoint, like, the Allies can afford to trade steps with the Germans, certainly. And the Germans didn't get their chance to play their kind of last real big replacement sale, which this would have helped a lot, actually, had they gotten the chance to get this onto the board. But it was a little too late. I could have seen a situation where, yeah, we could have gotten some good units in place, could have gotten them in a stronger defensive positioning using those rivers, the Rhine and the cities, rather than defending with like one or two crappy steps, but having like full armies holding a line would have been nice. Maybe would have forced the Allies to actually use the bomb markers for devastation, which we ended up not doing. So the experience was good. I think the seeing like more than just a couple cards played, like playing successive cards, seeing the rhythm of the cards was helpful. The conferences in the winter, because you're trying to get some quick things done. In the real campaign seasons, you want those replacement step cards, you want the blitz cards. That's when you want to play those. I think that kind of solidly fit in pretty well. I do wonder, like, what's to stop. Maybe we should have. I just played what the historical cards were. Maybe we should have played this, like, you know, sooner, right away, or whatever. Like, just as soon as we could, we should have tried to play this to save the game. But I put some guardrails around myself that probably affected the game too. If I had allowed myself more freedom and just said, "Well, play the card that matters. That's going to save this situation." I didn't really do that. I just said, "Well, we'll play the cards, um, and just see how the narrative unfolds." I guess the Germans could have played that earlier, right? It wouldn't have been a winter Wacht am Rhein. It had been a sooner one. That would have been maybe the steps needed to stop the overrunning of Germany. So I don't know. Something that's definitely, I look at it and go, yeah, I probably just should have done that. I should have done that. Maybe it would have made for a more interesting campaign had I done it. But I'm still cautiously playing these scenarios with the card schedule, because I know you can screw up the card play. You can play the wrong thing, and I'm cautious of that. It's one thing to move the units around and attack and defend and do the support markers and this, that, and the other. Those cards can have a pretty important effect on the whole game if you're not doing it right. So I'm very conscious of that. Generally, though, I will say I did have fun here. I mean, it was like, yeah, we're gonna do this is something I don't get to see in World in Flames very much, is the reentry of the Allied powers into mainland Europe, and it was a fun campaign to like, yeah, we're gonna work our way up Italy, we're gonna prep for D-Day, we're gonna do the end game here. All that was a fun experience just to play through. Um, and the sort of game weight of trying to play just this scenario isn't too terribly bad. That like I could set it up pretty fast. We were able to get playing pretty fast. Overall, pretty happy with the scenario as it is. I could see where we could get some more fun out of it with Schiff's Krieg. At some point I could play this again with Schiff's Krieg and see just how different it feels for that, and we'll certainly want to start looking at that Schiff's Krieg more and more as we start looking at Dicenso. But I think even for that, I'm going to keep Schiff's Krieg out because I still want to make sure I experience the game without it, and I have a really strong, feel for the game without Schiff's Krieg, and we'll slip that in at some point in the future. So where do we go from here? Well, what I'm going to probably do. I need to think about the logistics of this. I need to put this stuff aside. I need to reorganize it in the force pools in my baggies and kind of get Totaler Krieg packaged up. And I'm going to put maybe Dicenso on the same spot of my table. So just totally put this map away for a little bit. And we'll do some Dicenso stuff. I think what I'd like to do is play the Tora 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 training scenario. That's 4 turns, and then play the 1944 Divine Wind campaign, which will be a full Dicenso map, but will be the last, basically like the last year of the war, so to speak, and play that because I think what the Totaler Krieg training videos did is it showed a lot of early war stuff, big events, important events, great. And then I capstoned the training scenarios with this like later end of war progression, and that felt like a nice compliment. I'm going to try to do the same with Dicenso. So the newer version of Dicenso does not include some of the older training scenarios from the previous edition of Dicenso. I have no idea if I can reproduce those. I might try just to see, but that Tora 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 one, I think we can certainly jump right into that, knowing all the rules and stuff that we do know how to play the game at this point, and play through that for the 4 turns. Right, you get some. Technically, I guess that's mid-war, because the Japanese will have been fighting in China for a while, and then it's it's starting total war off in 41. But that's like a nice, a good feel for like, hey, here's the Pacific War, and then it'll be complemented by that sort of late war progression of the Allies against the Axis. So I think those are two nice complementary campaigns. One training, one the tail end of a full campaign that we can enjoy, and that'll give us enough of the Dicenso flavor of everything that we'll have some nice, well-rounded experiences. After that, I'm not sure what we'll do. I'm a little hesitant to just start a 1937 combined game. I've got some other ideas in mind, maybe to do some stuff that's a little that allows me to explore a little bit more of the product. So we may do that. But in the meantime, I hope this video series has been interesting. Stand by in the days or weeks to come. We will see Dicenso on the table, and we'll explore that as well. So thanks for watching. Take care, guys, and keep on gaming. We'll see you in the next one.